let's go ahead and add our secondary fire to our weapon. So let's open up our BP base weapon again. And up here we have our primary fire. So what I'll do is I'm actually gonna select all of this, make a comment, primary fire, primary. And let's move to our secondary fire here. Let's get rid of this code. We're not going to use this for now. And while we are here, actually, I'm also going to disconnect the print string of our primary fire. We know that it's working, so let's disconnect that real quick. All right. So the first thing that I'll do is I will actually create a variable. So I'm going to create a new variable. I'm going to give this the name enable secondary fire laser. Right. So our secondary fire will actually be a laser. And we're going to set this value whenever we do the secondary fire. I'm going to use the isStart as the value. So when we start our firing, it's going to set the enable secondary fire laser, and then if we release it, it's going to call the fire secondary again with the isStart as false, and it's going to disable our secondary fire laser. Ideal. Good. So let's hit compile. And next up, I'm going to grab my event tick. Let's move it to our secondary fire here as well, so it's a bit closer. And what we'll do is we'll fetch our bool once again, get enable secondary fire laser. We're going to add a branch. We're going to check if our enable secondary fire laser is true. If that is true, then we'll fire an event. So let's right click, add custom event. And we're going to call this update secondary fire laser. Like so. So every frame when our enable secondary fire laser is active, we are gonna call our update secondary fire laser. Good. All right. So what are we going to do with our secondary fire laser? Well, we're going to have to have a array cast, right? Or how it's called in Unreal, a multi-line trace or a line trace. So let's drag from here and add a multi-line trace. And we're going to do a multi-line trace for objects. Like so. So, and multi-line trace is basically a raycast all from Unity, right? It's gonna do a raycast, and all the objects that are hit will be returned in our hit result. Okay. Now, for the time being, we're going to set our debug type because this is something not really useful. Built in their multi-line trace, you can actually have debug options. We're going to set this to persistent, meaning that whenever we then fire this multi-line trace, we'll kind of get a debug line, and the debug line will remain active indefinitely. And that way we can see if everything is working correctly. So that's going to be quite useful. Now, the next thing that we'll do is we want to trace for specific objects, right? So I'm going to drag my object types here, drag, and we are going to see if I can quickly set this up. We're going to create an array. We're going to make an array up here. So under utilities, make array, like so. And we're going to add the objects that we want to multi-line trace against. So I want to have world static. I'm going to add a pin. I want to also have pawns in there. And I want to have my world dynamic in there as well. So these are the layers that we want to test collision against. Then of course we will need a start and an end point. So for that, let's take our fire socket from our weapon. And let's get the world location. So get world location, like so. That's going to be our starting point. And then our end point is also going to be based on this. So we're going to take our start point and then add a forward vector. So I'm going to first need the forward vector of my fire socket. So let's get forward vector like so. And then we're going to multiply that with a value, of course. But I'm going to first take my world location and add a vector. And that's going to be my endpoint. And now we just need to get this to the correct length that we want. So we're going to multiply our forward vector. And the multiplied forward vector is going to be added to our start position like so. And of course, we'll need to have a laser distance. So let's set this to 25 for now. And I'm going to right click and promote to variable. And I'm going to give this the name laser distance. And expose this variable. And let's actually also create a category secondary fire, like so. Let's add our enable secondary fire to the secondary fire category. And let's also create a category for the primary fire. So I'm going to select my primary fire rate, create a category primary fire, and move my primary fire projectile class also in there. Excellent. Okay. So at this point, this should already do something, right? It's going to do a line trace. We're not going to process the line trace, but we should already see it because we have our debug options enabled. So let's hit compile. Let's hit save. Let's head over here now and let's see real quick. We have our real-time audio. Let's see if we can actually mute it while we're playing as well, but I'm not sure if it's going to work. Yeah. So if I right-click now, we can actually see our line trace. And of course, I made a little mistake here. I set my distance, my laser distance to 25. Well, I want to have 25 meters, so it needs to be 2,500 because all the values are in centimeters. So let's hit compile and save. And I'm actually going to temporarily, let's open my volume mixer. I'm going to temporarily mute Unreal so we don't have all the noises going on. So if I right click now, you can actually see my line trace. You can see where it hits, so where it has the detection and how far it's going and so forth. All right, it's going pretty far. That's fine. I'll change that in a moment. So from the looks of it, everything is working as expected. So let's start adding our functionality. So let's go back to our base weapon. It's a bit far, so I'm gonna set it to 15. So 1,500. So 15 meters. We don't want it to be super overpowered. Now let's head to the end of our multi-line trace. And what we'll do now is we'll drag our out hits and make a for each loop, but a for each loop with break. Because I want to be able to stop this if I want to. So I don't want this this laser to go through the wall, for example, right? The BSP geometry. That will allow us to stop whenever we hit the BSP geometry. All right. So that's the first thing actually that we're going to set up. We're going to set up our break here. So let's see. The first thing that we'll do here in our loop is we're going to take our array element and we're going to break the hit results. That way we have access of all the parameters and variables that are as a result of our break. And we're going to take our hit actor and check if it is valid. Okay, connect our loop body execution pin. All right, so if it is not valid, right? Then we kind of want to break it because we know that we didn't hit, the hit that we did was not an actor. So it was BSP geometry, if you remember correctly. I already mentioned this in a previous video. So if that is the case, then we want to break. But I also want to store my current distance. So I want to know how far our break actually, ended up. And we're going to use that value later on to then visualize our laser. So I'm going to add a variable, call this laser hit distance, make it a float, like so. Put it in my secondary fire, and I'm going to set this value. I'm going to set it to our distance. And then after that, I'm going to break our loop. We're going to stop looping over our hits. We hit something that we don't want to hit. It's the end of our firing. Okay. Now, something important. Say that we don't hit anything. We want to make sure that our laser hit distance is still set to the maximum distance, right? So if we didn't hit anything, it needs to be set to the full distance. So let's go back to the beginning here. And at the beginning of our update secondary laser fire, I'm going to set my laser hit distance. Hold down Control to move the spin. I'm going to set it to my laser distance, right? So that's the full laser distance. So that way I always know that it's first initialized, and then if we hit a wall that we're not allowed to go past, then we set the value here. Cool. All right. So going forward, we're going to create a function to then deal with our hits. So whenever we then do hit something, we're going to process our laser collision. Just similarly as we did in our projectile. If you remember how we did that in our base projectile, we're going to do the same thing here. So let's create a new function. So head over to the functions here and add a new function. Let's call it process laser collision. Like so. And let's add an input. And our input will be other actor. And the type will be of type actor. It's going to be an object reference. Good. Let's hit compile and save. And now let's minimize this and let's open up our base projectile. Because the way we're going to handle this is going to be very similar like our process collision in our base projectile, right? So let's have a look here. We are still in our process collision function, and we actually are going to copy paste the entire thing. So I'm going to select everything, Control C, head to my base weapon, zoom out a little bit, Control V, and then move this to the side here and connect everything up. Also, on a side note, I just did Control C, Control V. If I were to open a text editor, so I'm going to open up Notepad++, for example, and if I hit Control V, you'll actually see that everything that you copy paste in Unreal can be copied to a text file. So you can kind of create text file prefabs if you want to, and then share them with people. Now, of course, be careful if you have cross references, but if you have fully isolated pieces of code, you can just copy paste the text and then paste it into Unreal. It's a nice thing to know. Okay, so in essence, this is fine, right? Because it's going to have the same behavior as our collision of the base projectile, which is great. Then we don't have to rewrite everything. What I'm going to do though is I'm going to remove our sound here at the end, right? I'm not going to spawn the sound attached and destroy actor. I'm going to delete this. It's very important. Okay. So next up, I'm going to hit compile. And we'll see a bunch of errors, but that's fine, right? That was to be expected. We copy pasted some stuff and we don't have all of these variables and things available. So we're going to deal with that. So the first thing that we'll handle is our ignore tag. So you could actually create a variable ignore tag. If I right click, I'm going to do just that. I'm going to create variable ignore tag. I'm going to expose it here, and then I'm going to move it to my secondary fire. And I'm also going to change the name. I'm going to name it laser ignore tag, like so. And we're going to make sure that it is configured correctly. So let's hit compile. And let's set it to friendly, just as we did previously. Also notice that the tag has been correctly updated here, so that is great. Then next up, let's add a additional input variable to our process laser collision. Let's add another one and call it damage amount and make it a float. All right. And now we're going to replace our error damage amount nodes here, right, with that damage amount that we have here. So I'm gonna move it over here, create a reroute node, and let's connect this one at the top. Again, also remove the spawn sound for this one and the destroy actor for that one. And then let's head over here. I'm going to remove my interface implementation. It's still in the other class as a reference, but I don't really need it here. We're not going to use it. Then let's get my damage amount there as well, like so. So let's zoom in a little bit, zoom out, and connect it. I'm going to double click on my wire here just to make sure that it's somewhat clean. Like so. Double click on the wire, like so. Alright, so now we have hooked up our damage. Let's hit compile. Okay, all our errors are fixed. Good. So let's set up our damage as well. So let's add a new variable and give the name laser damage per second. And let's expose that one, hit compile, and set the default value to 50. All right. And let's head back to the event graph because our process laser collision has been finalized. Now we actually need to use our process laser collision. So in case we had a valid hit for a laser, I'm going to process laser collision. My other actor is going to be my hit actor, like so. And my damage amount, we'll have to calculate it. So let's get our laser damage per second, move it to the secondary fire, and just get it over here. So now we want to know damage per second. So what we'll have to do is take this one and divide it by our current delta time. Now, as you know, we don't know the delta time over here, so we can actually request it. So we're gonna get world delta seconds. So that's the current world delta time for when this event will be fired at the moment that it's been requested. I'm going to multiply our damage per seconds by our delta time. So it's nicely scaled over time, like so. All right. Now let's quickly head back to our multi-line trace and let's change our draw debug type to for one frame. Okay. So it's not going to be persistent, it's going to be for one frame, but it'll have a draw time of 5. So that should work nicely. So let's compile and save everything and give it a go. For now, right click. You can see as soon as I release, And we should be dealing damage here. Should be dying. Yep. There we go. Yay. It's working, and it's not going to fire beyond the wall as well. Shouldn't, at least. There we go. A small little addition, I just mentioned the draw time. Well, the draw time is for this option, the for duration, right? For 1 frame, it's just drawing it as long as we're firing. Just wanted to make that clear. All right. So I'm going to leave it here and see you in the next video.